me. I'm a retired high school principal and been judging We the People for 5 years.
I should have had that for All right, Unit 6, question 3.
One way to get to the judges.
Unit 6, question 3. What do you think are the best ways to achieve constitutional change? Thomas Jefferson argued that the Constitution should be revised every generation. The founders provided instead for an amendment process to take place only if and when revisions may be deemed necessary. What method do you think is better and why? In what ways, if any, have constitutional amendments helped the United States become a more perfect union? And please explain. You can begin.
If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates, President George Washington declared. Constitutional amendments, as delineated by President Washington, are spurred by citizens' qualms with their government. Throughout our history, the Constitution has been molded by progressive interpretations, making the original doctrine more adaptable to today's times. Two distinct methods have been debated about how constitutional change should take place, either rewriting every generation or amending the original document as the country progresses.
We agree that the amendment process is the best way to achieve constitutional change. The framers designed the Constitution knowing that society will be subject to change over time. And in order to maintain a lasting government, the principles defined in the Constitution must advance what the citizens it governs. This is evident within Article 5 of the Constitution, allowing for the addition of amendments, which are meant to provide redress for the government's wrongs.
The two-step amendment process requires a 2/3 majority in both the Senate and the House in order to officially be proposed, and a 3/4 majority of state ratifying conventions or state legislatures to be ratified. The inclusion of new amendments has progressed the United States toward a more perfect union. In the spirit of the preamble of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment was created in hopes of attaining a more perfect union by providing due process to all people under U.S. jurisdiction, and to redefine citizenship by recognizing a more diverse population following the end of slavery. In 1869, the 15th Amendment gave all men the right to vote, regardless of race. Both of these were created in order to give newly freed slaves more rights. This was followed years later in 1920 by the 19th Amendment, which allowed women the right to vote, specifically because the U.S. claimed they were spreading democracy, but without allowing women the right to vote, this claim was hypocritical and would allow other countries to criticize the United States.
Thomas Jefferson's idea to rewrite the Constitution every generation appears to be beneficial upon initial impression. However, it is impractical in nature. Because the current U.S. population is exponentially larger and more diverse than it was in 1788, it would be nearly impossible to appease all modern-day citizens. A generational constitution would exacerbate partisanship and emphasize our political system's lack of compromise when faced with pending legislation.
For example, the inability of Congress to agree on a budget for the 2014 fiscal year led to the government shutdown of 2013, demonstrating how far the parties have split. Confirming the nominee who will fill a Supreme Court vacancy after Justice Antonin Scalia's death is yet another partisan issue, with Democrats and Republicans refusing to reach a consensus.
Additionally, Jeffersonian reforms would be inefficient because the ratification process in 1787 required the approval of 13 states needed to ratify the Constitution. Today, satisfying all 50 states would be a nearly impossible task, ensuring that a perfect representational government could never be reached. The framers settled on a compromise that would allow the Constitution to continue to evolve with the United States, while still maintaining the core ideals of the founding document.
Another effective way of achieving constitutional change without rewriting the Constitution every generation is judicial review, established in the 1803 Supreme Court case Marbury v. Madison. Judicial review is the process by which the U.S. Supreme Court checks the constitutionality of acts of government. In the 1966 case Miranda v. Arizona, the Supreme Court decided that detained criminal suspects must be informed of their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, creating the Miranda rights and a legal precedent.
In the landmark 1965 Supreme Court case, Griswold v. Connecticut, the versatility of the Bill of Rights is exemplified within the use of the First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments, asserting that the right to privacy is protected by the penumbras emanated in the Bill of Rights. The ability of the Supreme Court to use the implications within the Bill of Rights as means of change allows constitutional change to occur within Supreme Court decisions. This gives American citizens more rights without having to go through the amendment process. Even though judicial review provides room for constitutional change, the amendment process is still the best way to achieve this change because it reflects the will of the people. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that initial presentation. And
other examples can you cite other than the ones that you already did in your initial presentation?
In addition to the ones we already cited, a great example is Marbury versus Madison.
Bradley Board of Education is a landmark Supreme Court case that, underneath the 14th Amendment, allowed for a greater acquisition of civil rights to all citizens.
In 2015, the Supreme Court case Oberfeld v. Hodges also allowed homosexuals the right to get married because of the 14th.
Before that, the fundamental right of marriage was found in the case Love v. Virginia of 1967.
What, you talked about, how important constitutional changes with time, improving this country, making us a more perfect union. What additional constitutional changes, if any, do you think are necessary to make us a more perfect union?
Currently, the United States holds almost $20 trillion in national debt. So I would propose an amendment that would create it so the government cannot spend more money than it takes in. So we're never in this situation again.
Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 of the Constitution states that the president must be a natural-born citizen. But in a study by the Washington Post, it was deemed that almost 52% of billion-dollar startup companies are begun by immigrants to this country. So if these brilliant individuals are able to put their ideas out in that way, why should they not be at the head of our government as well?
DC has a population of over 600,000 people, but they have no congressional representation, which is really lacking an American ideal. So I would propose an amendment that would give DC congressional representation.
In the United Kingdom, people who are running for office are only allowed to campaign for 100 days. I would propose an amendment that also has this happen in the United States. And although this would restrict political speech, it would allow the citizens of the United States to become more involved without becoming bored with the political process.
I would propose an amendment to prevent gerrymandering from happening so we can get a true proportional representation of our citizens.
Good thoughts, thank you.
I love your presentation. I would like you to answer this question for me. How can Congress bring about needed changes? What examples can you cite? Now, you've talked about a couple like the national debt already. I would like to hear some others.
Ultimately, what Congress has to do is stop their political gridlock. They have to learn to work together across the aisles with different bills that they propose. And so, with things like the national budget, people need to come to consensus on what we need to do in order to solve that problem. And ultimately, this is what Congress needs to do to work together.
How would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, currently we have the problem of the Democrats propose an amendment, but there's something in that amendment that the Republicans don't like. So I would suggest that we create an amendment so that way we just look at one paper of the bill. So that way we don't have these giant packets of bills where maybe you just don't like one thing in it and then the whole thing has to go back. So we fix the little things and then they can pass.
Is this something, another way that you can think of doing it? There was a way that we used to do it that we haven't done in the past few years.
Filibustering is an effective way to try and make your point seen, and also gets the media attention to whatever act or legislation you're trying to pass.
However, this filibuster has actually tended to exacerbate hyperpartisanship today in Congress. So trying to eliminate this and really get back to what Congress is supposed to do is form compromises on this legislation is where we need the direction to take.
But what motivates them to do that?
By writing letters to your congressmen or women, you were really saying, like, this is what I expect you to do if you want me to vote for you again. So that's a really great way to hold them accountable.
So some people say that the amendment process takes a long time and it's difficult. Some people think that's a good thing. And while I take no position and need to take no position, we see some degree of debate about the Obergefell decision, whether or not that should have been done legislatively rather than by the Supreme Court. Talk to us about whether the difficulty and wait time for amendments is good or bad and why.
I highly support the amount of time it takes for the amendment process to take place because I'm worried that when a certain administration is in charge, if there's a smaller time for amendments to be passed, then corruption can happen and the entire Constitution can be changed in that one administration.
As we've seen in Switzerland, they have the amendment process, which is very speedy compared to ours, and they have amended things such as bike paths
So you guys did well because I didn't want to disengage. So this is feedback time. I'll go first and I'll say that you guys did very, very well. I just loved the presentation. I loved the question and answer more than the original delivery because you guys were so engaged. And the answers about what we can do for a constitutional amendment, every single one of you guys had something. You had some kind of analysis and reasoning and a how come behind it. And I can't help but think you guys practiced that when you got that. And if you didn't, then you guys did really well on that. And I thought you were engaged, research, got away from the, no problem reading the original can. But then once you guys looked up and engaged, I could really see that you guys had mastered the material. And that was really great.
I agree with all of my colleagues' comments. You guys did a great job. I thought you had a really nice presentation, had great transitions. You really had great responses to the questions. I really appreciated each individual one of you having a different response to my colleague's question on my left. I thought you were able to respond with citations. That was awesome, and you had excellent reasoning and support for your arguments, so you did a really great job.
I mean, that was nice that each one of you had an example, and I thought it was very, very well done. By the way, the thing that you used to force compromise was in your marks. That's what forced people to compromise. I have to deal with DC all the time, and I don't love that. You have to learn that one, but that was a big change. I mean, you clearly showed depth of knowledge. You've heard my comments before since you had your report. Good job.
What else can I say? As a high school principal, I commend you for taking the time out of your life this first semester of the school year and devoting so much extra time to this program. This program is the most beneficial program you will have in your K-12 career. This will carry you on into post-education, into a career, be it legal, medical, journalism. The fact that you took the time to do this will make you a better person. We get into what they're talking about, in my opinion, is the old educational term, DOK, depth of knowledge. And you just didn't say, oh, this did that. You said this did that, but the reason and the outcome and the unintended consequences of this work. Digging down, the facts are fine. The reasoning and the consequences of those facts. Excellent. Thank you for a job very well done.
Before we adjourn, could you please point out and embarrass your coach? Who deserves credit for your good performance? You guys did a great job. Thank you.